In old age, don't let these 5 worthless things bother you. My friends, when you reach this stage of life, something becomes very clear. Time is no longer something you assume you have an endless supply of. You begin to understand that every morning is a gift, every conversation matters a little more, and every peaceful day becomes more precious than any possession you spent decades chasing. I am well into my later years now, and if there is one thing life has taught me, it is that happiness is rarely stolen by major tragedies. Most of the time, it is taken from us little by little, by things that seem important, but are actually worthless. They sit quietly in our minds. We carry them around for years. We feed them with our attention. We protect them as if they are valuable. Yet all they do is drain our peace. Over the years, I have watched friends grow old. I have watched neighbors retire. I have seen people enter their 70s and 80s with enough money, enough family, enough comfort to live well, yet they remained restless inside. At first, I thought perhaps their circumstances were the problem. But after enough conversations, enough hospital visits, enough afternoons sitting together on park benches talking about life, I realized something different. Again and again, the same patterns appeared. The same invisible burdens kept showing up. Today, I want to share 5 of them with you. Not because I have mastered them perfectly, but because I have struggled with every single one myself. The first worthless thing that steals happiness in old age is the belief that happiness is somewhere else. I know that sounds strange because many of us have lived this way for decades. We spend our younger years saying, "When I get married, then I'll be happy." Then marriage comes, and we say, "When we buy a home, then life will feel complete." Later, it becomes, "When the children are grown. Then, when I retire. Then, when my finances improve. Then, when my health gets better." The destination keeps moving. I remember sitting with an old friend years ago. He had recently retired after working more than 40 years. During his entire career, retirement had been the prize at the end of the road. He talked about it constantly. He imagined peaceful mornings, freedom from stress, endless satisfaction. Then retirement arrived. 6 months later, he confessed something surprising. He wasn't unhappy exactly, but he wasn't fulfilled either. The magical feeling he expected never appeared. The reason was simple. He had spent so many years treating happiness as a future event that he never learned how to experience it in the present. Many older people fall into this trap without realizing it. They keep waiting for one more improvement before allowing themselves to be content. One more solution, one more change, one more condition. But life doesn't work that way. When I was younger, I thought happiness was something I would eventually arrive at, like reaching a destination on a map. Now, after many decades, I see it differently. Happiness is not a destination. It is a way of paying attention. It is the ability to notice what is already here. A warm cup of coffee, a phone call from a grandchild, the sunlight entering through a window, a body that may ache a little, but still carries you through another day. These things sound ordinary, because they are ordinary, yet much of life is made of ordinary moments. One day you realize that the future you spent years waiting for has become the present you are living in. And if you cannot appreciate it now, you probably would not have appreciated it then either. That realization changed me. I stopped asking myself what was missing. I started asking what was already present. The difference was remarkable. Peace began appearing in places where I had never noticed it before. Now, let us move to the second worthless thing that steals happiness. The second worthless thing is comparison. This one is especially dangerous because it often disguises itself as fairness. You see someone whose children call more often than yours. You see someone who appears healthier, someone who has more savings, someone whose retirement seems easier, someone who receives more attention, more praise, more affection. And before you realize what is happening, you begin measuring your life against theirs. I have seen this happen among people in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Age does not automatically free us from comparison. In some cases, it makes it worse. Years ago, I knew two brothers. One had achieved considerable financial success. The other had lived a simpler life. Every family gathering became painful because the second brother could not stop comparing himself. He measured every accomplishment, every purchase, every compliment. The tragedy was that he actually had a beautiful life. He had a loving wife, good health, children who respected him, friends who enjoyed his company. Yet he could not enjoy any of it because he was constantly looking sideways instead of forward. Comparison is a strange habit. It convinces us that someone else's blessings somehow diminish our own, but they do not. Another person's success does not erase your success. Another person's happiness does not cancel your happiness. Another person's good fortune does not make your life less meaningful. When you compare, you stop seeing your own journey clearly. You become distracted by a race that was never yours to run. I learned this lesson the hard way. There was a period in my life when I looked at people who seemed to age better than I was aging. They walked faster, they traveled more, they appeared stronger and more energetic. For a while, I felt frustrated. Why was their path easier than mine? Then, one afternoon, a simple thought entered my mind. I was comparing my private struggles to their public appearance. I had no idea what challenges they carried behind closed doors. I did not know their fears, their regrets, their sleepless nights, their family worries, or their health concerns. I was comparing reality to an illusion. Many of us do this every day. We compare our behind-the-scenes life to someone else's highlight reel. And when we do, we guarantee our own dissatisfaction. The truth is that every human being carries a burden. Every family has a hidden story. Every smiling face has known sorrow. Once you truly understand that, comparison begins to lose its power. You stop asking, why do they have more than me? You start asking, how can I appreciate what I already have? That single shift can transform an entire life. And yet there is another burden that often grows out of comparison, one that can remain hidden for decades. It sits quietly inside the heart, feeding on old memories and old wounds. Many people carry it for so long that they forget it is there. They think they are protecting themselves, when in reality, they are carrying a weight that grows heavier every year. This brings me to the third worthless thing that steals happiness in old age. The third worthless thing that steals happiness in old age is resentment. I have met people who carried resentment for 20 years. Some carried it for 40. A few carried it for so long that the original event had almost disappeared, yet the bitterness remained. What fascinated me was that the people holding the resentment often believed they were preserving justice. They believed that letting go would somehow mean admitting that what happened was acceptable. But life taught me something different. Many years ago, I had a friend who was cheated in a business deal. He lost a significant amount of money. The betrayal came from someone he trusted deeply. What happened to him was genuinely unfair. Nobody could deny that. Yet what surprised me was what happened afterward. The financial loss hurt him for a few years. The resentment hurt him for the next 20. Every conversation eventually returned to that betrayal. Every gathering somehow brought up the same story. Every new disappointment reopened the old wound. Meanwhile, the man who had wronged him moved away, built a different life, and probably spent very little time thinking about the incident at all. One day, my friend admitted something that stayed with me. He said, "I think I've spent more years suffering from remembering it than I suffered from the event itself." That sentence contains a profound truth. The injury may happen once. The memory can happen thousands of times. When resentment lives inside us, we keep reopening the door and inviting our suffering back in. We replay old conversations. We rehearse arguments that ended decades ago. We imagine what we should have said. We imagine how things should have turned out, and every replay costs us peace. Now, I am not suggesting that people should excuse harmful behavior. I am not suggesting that injustice does not matter. Life is full of disappointments, betrayals, broken promises, and unfair treatment. Most of us have experienced them. But there is a difference between remembering a lesson and carrying a burden. The lesson protects you. The burden exhausts you. As I grew older, I realized that forgiveness is often misunderstood. People think forgiveness is something you give to the other person. Sometimes it is, but more often, forgiveness is something you give yourself. It is the decision to stop carrying a weight that no longer serves a purpose. At our age, time is precious. Energy is precious. Peace of mind is precious. Why spend those precious resources feeding anger towards someone who may not even be thinking about you? I have learned that some people deserve distance. Some relationships should remain in the past. Some trust should never be restored. But even then, resentment is optional. You can protect yourself without poisoning your own mind. You can be wise about who you let close without carrying anger as a lifelong companion. That distinction took me many years to understand. In my younger days, I thought holding on to anger was a form of strength, as if remembering every detail of a wrongdoing would somehow keep me safe from it happening again. But over time, I realized it was doing the opposite. It was keeping the wound alive long after the situation had ended. And that is when I began to see the fourth worthless thing that steals happiness in old age: worry about the future. I know this one intimately because it has a way of appearing even when life is quiet. You sit in your chair, everything is calm, and suddenly the mind starts projecting forward. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if I become ill? What if my savings are not enough? What if I become a burden? What if my children struggle? What if the world becomes more unstable? One thought leads to another, and before you realize it, you are living in a future that does not exist, while the present moment quietly disappears in the background. I have seen people in their 70s and 80s suffer more from imagined futures than from actual present difficulties. I remember one man who would wake up at night convinced that something terrible was about to happen. He would sit in silence, thinking through endless scenarios, preparing himself for disasters that never came. One day, after a particularly long conversation, he paused and said something I will never forget. He said, "I have lived through so many tragedies in my mind, I am surprised I still have energy left for real life." That sentence stayed with me because it reveals how much of our suffering is self-created, not by events themselves, but by the mind's habit of rehearsing them. Of course, I am not saying we should ignore the future. That would not be wisdom. We should take care of our health, make responsible decisions, prepare as best as we can. But preparation is very different from worry. Preparation leads to action and then quietness. Worry leads to repetition, exhaustion, and no resolution. One moves you forward. The other keeps you trapped in the same mental cycle. And so I learned to ask myself a simple question whenever my mind drifts too far ahead. Is there anything I can actually do right now? If the answer is no, then I gently return to what is real in front of me. The sound in the room, the feeling of breathing, the simple fact that at this moment, nothing is actually happening except life itself, unfolding quietly. And this brings me, finally, to the fifth worthless thing that steals happiness in old age: regret about the past. This one often arrives softly, without warning, usually in quiet moments when there is nothing else competing for attention. It begins as a memory, then slowly turns into a conversation with oneself, a replaying of old decisions, old mistakes, old words that can never be taken back. I have known people who lived more inside their regrets than inside their present lives. They could sit in a beautiful garden, surrounded by peace, and yet be somewhere else entirely, revisiting something that happened decades ago, as if it were still unfolding. I understand this deeply because I have done it myself. There were times in my life when I believed that if I revisited a mistake often enough, I might somehow arrive at a different ending. But the ending never changed. Only my suffering repeated. And slowly, I came to see something very simple but very important. The past is not a place you can return to. It is only a memory that appears in the present. And every time you relive it with regret, you are not changing it. You are only reopening it inside your own mind. There is a difference, I have learned, between reflection and regret. Reflection helps you grow. It allows you to see clearly, to understand, to adjust your path moving forward. Regret, however, does not look forward. It circles endlessly around what cannot be changed. It keeps you emotionally tied to something that no longer exists. And over time, that attachment becomes a quiet form of suffering that many people carry without even realizing it. So I began practicing something simple. When an old regret rises, I acknowledge it without fighting it. And then I remind myself that the moment it belongs to is already complete. Whatever happened has already finished its course. What remains is only how I choose to live now. And in that realization, there is a small but powerful freedom. The freedom to stop punishing myself for being human, for making decisions with limited understanding, for living a life that was always unfolding one uncertain step at a time. And so when I look back across these 5 burdens, this belief that happiness is somewhere else, the habit of comparison, the weight of resentment, the anxiety about the future, and the pull of regret, I see a pattern. None of them are real in the way we think they are. They are mental constructions that we repeatedly return to, as if revisiting them will somehow give us control or resolution. But in truth, they only take us away from the one place where life is actually happening, which is here and now. As I share this with you, I want to end with something simple. Not advice, not instruction, just a reflection from someone who has lived long enough to see what matters and what fades. Peace does not come from perfect circumstances. It comes from a quieter mind. A mind that is no longer constantly chasing, comparing, replaying, or fearing. A mind that can rest in what is already present. Thank you for listening to me today. I am grateful for your time, and I hope these words stay with you in a gentle way as you continue your day. Take care of yourself, and I wish you peace in the days ahead. Goodbye for now, and thank you for listening.